All right, welcome to TYT Interviews, everybody. We got a great guest for you guys today, Matt Stoller. Matt has been involved in progressive politics in 28 different ways, behind the scenes, in the middle of the scenes, in front of the scenes, in every way. Right now, actually, he's doing something interesting, which you can almost always say about Matt. He's a political analyst for the TV show Brand X with Russell Brand on FX, which is Thursdays at 11 p.m. It's a trippy show. You should check that out. And Matt also used to work with Dylan Ratigan, so a lot of love there as well. But we brought Matt in to talk about his role as senior policy advisor for Alan Grayson back in the day when you worked on Dodd-Frank and got Auditing the Fed as part of the bill. So let's start on that because that's amazing. So how in the world did you guys actually get a progressive priority passed in this Congress?
Well, it was the last Congress,
right,
just
right,
in
exactly.
2009, 2010. And well, it's a really good question. I mean, how deep do you want me to go into a process, or do you want me to give you broad strokes?
Well, I'm interested in the process. That's why I want to talk to you about it. So let me start by asking you this. Okay, so Ron Paul's always been interested in auditing the Fed. Grayson was interested. You've got an interesting right-left combo there. But the problem is the establishment who wants to protect the Fed. So how did you guys get establishment Republican and establishment Democrats to agree to this position?
Well, so broadly, I'll start by talking about the policy issue and then get into the process, because it actually always starts with policy. So the problem in 2009 that we were trying to tackle was these massive bailouts, disbursements of loans or grants or whatever it was that the Fed was doing to different banks, investment banks, hedge funds that were going out by the billions, by the trillions, and we didn't know who they were going to. We didn't really know how much was going out. We didn't know what collateral they were taking in return. All we knew was that the Federal Reserve was saying, "Trust us. We're the lender of last resort. We're independent. We're above politics." And
so can we stop there for a second? I think a lot of people are confused by what the hell the Fed is. So they say they're above politics and that we should trust them when they give away trillions of dollars to the banks. But aren't the banks part and parcel of running the Fed?
Well, okay, so our economy is structured around a couple of core institutions. The Federal Reserve is it's the bank of banks that controls, to the extent that there's any institution that controls the amount of money in circulation, it's the Federal Reserve. And so the Federal Reserve, if the economy is doing really well and it looks like there is pricing pressure on oil, things are getting more expensive, the Federal Reserve will reduce the amount of money in circulation. And if things are doing poorly, the Federal Reserve will increase the amount of money in circulation. And the way it does this is it manipulates interest rates through the buying and selling of Treasury bonds, or traditionally that's how it's studied. And you know, the Fed has basically made the case for many, many years since its founding, don't worry, we're just buying and selling plain vanilla Treasury bonds or Treasury bills, so you don't really have to audit us, you don't really have to know what's going on behind the scenes, because it's all, I mean, it's just Treasury bills, Treasury bonds. Now, during the bailouts, right, in 2008, 2009, the Federal Reserve took all sorts of stuff onto its balance sheet. You know, sort of credit default swaps. So
not the simple
bonds,
treasury
like
bonds, but really complicated stuff, and what they oftentimes call toxic assets.
Yeah, I mean, it took a lot of assets from Bear Stearns, it took assets from AIG, and it took a lot of mortgage-backed securities onto its balance sheet. And this was a way of the Fed made the argument about some of these programs, well, we're still controlling the money supply, it's just now the economy is so complicated, we can't just do it with Treasury bonds, we also have to do it with mortgage-backed securities and other securities. And we also have the mandate to stabilize the banking system, because obviously the banking system was very unstable, so what the Fed was doing is they were saying, well, we have to be lending to, say, Goldman Sachs, or we have to be lending to these other institutions, and we have to give them as much as they want in return for collateral, or else the whole system will collapse.
So I know we're going deep into the Fed here, but I think we need to for the purposes of this conversation. So they print money as a way of controlling, they have power over the of not where we spend the money, that's theoretically Congress, right? But they actually print the money. So in some weird ways, printing tax dollar money, correct me anywhere where I'm wrong, right? And then Ben Bernanke is appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, so he seems like he's a public figure. But who's behind Ben Bernanke? Who are on the New York Fed, other Feds? Who's on their boards, et cetera?
So to explain, I'll explain the structure of the Federal Reserve and what the central bank does. So the central bank is a hybrid institution. It has a board of governors in DC headed by the Federal Reserve chairman named Ben Bernanke that makes policy determinations and does a lot of research. And then it has 12 regional banks and that are sort of quasi-private, quasi-public banks. The New York Fed is the most prominent, but there are 12 and they're around the country: Atlanta, St. Louis, Kansas City, and so forth. Yeah. And these banks, regional reserve banks, they process their clearinghouse for checks, they regulate banks in their area, they report on macroeconomic conditions in their area, and they have a vote on the coordinating body called the Federal Open Market Committee, which sets interest rates and makes policy decisions around bailouts and things like that. The Federal Reserve also does a lot of foreign currency operations, manages relationships with other central banks, and is a big bank regulator. So the regional banks, now and the Board of Governors in DC, the president appoints the governors, and usually they're taken from the ranks of bankers and economists. But then regional banks have on their board local bankers, local business people, and then sometimes university presidents, occasionally a labor person. But usually it's bankers. And so actually you have this strange situation where on the New York Fed, which is the main reserve bank and did a lot of basically handled all the bailouts, you had Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan sitting on the board of the bank overseeing the Reserve Bank while JP Morgan was regulated by the New York Fed and doing deals that the New York Fed was heavily involved in, like the Bear Stearns deal. This is a dramatic conflict of interest. Another famous, I think, board member of one of the Federal Reserve banks was Herman Cain. I think he was a advisory member of the Kansas City Fed, but basically it's these aggregations of good old boys networks all over the country. And the GAO did a study because of Dodd-Frank. Most of them are white, most of them are male, most of them are from the corporate or banking sectors. And what they care about is, are creditors protected? And people don't think about the Federal Reserve because the Federal Reserve is considered, they've made this powerful case that they're independent, they're above politics, they're bailing out the system only when necessary. And do you really want Congress to get involved? Right? Do you really want politicians making decisions about monetary policy, about this fragile banking system? Or do you want technocratic experts? And that was always the debate, and that still is the debate. And it's been a debate for a couple hundred years, and this was just one part of it. Well, sorry, not a couple hundred years, but 90, 100 years, something like that.
So let me just focus on one part again for clarity here. So they say they're technocratic, but on the board of the New York Fed sits bankers.
Right.
So they're not technocrats, they're people who are directly interested, and financially interested in the results of what the New York Fed
And that's just the most obvious. I mean, there's a huge revolving door. People at the New York Fed are constantly going to Wall Street, back and forth. I was talking to a friend who is a junior staffer at the New York Fed, and she was leaving to go to some bank, and I was like, why are you leaving? Don't you love public service? And she said, yeah, but in order to move up the ladder, I have to go into the private sector, become a senior private banker, then I can move back to the Fed. So it's actually, it's just a corrupt system, right? And there's all sorts of insider trading. I mean, it's a terrible system. But the idea that we would look at the system and think about changing it was lunacy before the financial crisis. And then when the financial crisis hit, what happened is you saw the government spend $700 billion with TARP, and who knows how many we now know how many trillions through the Federal Reserve system of lending. And all of a sudden, this kind of Ron Paul crazy libertarian, I say crazy in sarcastic air quotes, libertarian strain of thinking, which comes from some very dark places in America. And I'm not like naive about that, but we were aligned with them. And they basically oppose centralized government power of any form because the Federal Reserve, financed World War I, financed World War II. It's a war financing body. It finances our national interests. And it also financed, the New Deal. It financed a whole bunch of other stuff, the Great Society. And the Ron Paul people don't like that for a lot of reasons. But one of the things that they were saying is, we don't think that this bank, this central bank, is legitimate. And we want to know what happened to all of these trillions of dollars. And unfortunately, progressives are basically aligned with Wall Street and have been since the New Deal. And so you'll see people like Paul Krugman, who supported Ben Bernanke, who opposed breaking up the big banks. And he is considered probably the leading intellectual on the side of the progressives. But he is very firmly on the side of Wall Street, if you actually look at the nitty-gritty policy questions. And so auditing the Federal Reserve was something that Tim Geithner didn't want to do, Barack Obama didn't want to do, Steny Hoyer didn't want to do, a lot of the Republicans didn't want to do. And the people who wanted to do it were Ron Paul and then kind of a new strain of Congress critter who had been elected in 2009 after the financial crisis. They saw the financial crisis and then they won their election. It's very important to understand with politicians, when they won their race or lost their last race, it kind of gives you a sense of when their political adolescence was. Because people always remember how they won their last race, and that's how they think they have to stay in office. I won because I did X, therefore I will always have to do X. Or I won in X environment, so X is always what I have to pay attention to. So Barney Frank in 1982, when he won his first congressional race, he won it in a Reaganite era. And so he always thought in Reaganite terms, which is to say, the banks are going to get most of the money, and I'll carve out, and I'm good with that, and I'll carve out a little bit for low-income housing. And that was Barney's model. Now, he's considered a liberal, but he wasn't a liberal. He was a neoliberal. And a lot of the people that got elected in 2009, like Alan Grayson, actually are genuine liberals. And so when Grayson came in, the way we got onto the Federal Reserve question is we had a hearing that was with Donald Cohen, who was the vice chair of the Federal Reserve. And you don't hear a lot about hearings, only when something kind of explosive happens. But hearings are the lifeblood of the congressional process. And so Donald Cohen, very savvy vice chair, Alan Greenspan's right-hand man for decades, comes in, and the financial blogosphere was created during the 2006 onward, the foreclosure crisis and the financial crisis. And so I had a bunch of documents that the financial blogs had uncovered about the Fed. And I put them on Grayson's briefing packet. He looked through them, and he asked Donald Cohen, so who got the money? I don't forget how much it was, $800 billion that you guys lent out. And Donald Cohen said, well, I can tell you the types of institutions that got the money and the types of collateral that we got, and et cetera, et cetera. And
I saw that,
yeah, the video went viral.
Right.
A couple 100,000 people saw it, and it's because I took the video, clipped it, sent it out to the financial bloggers and ex-regulators and analysts, and et cetera, and I asked them for follow-up questions, and they sent me follow-up questions, and we followed up, and immediately, it was funny because Grayson mentioned UBS. He was like, "How much did you give to UBS, which is a big Swiss bank?" And so that day, we got a call from the lobbyist at UBS being like, "Just want to make sure everything's okay." And that that's how it works, and the implicit promises of donations are always there. So Grayson ended up getting most of his money from internet donors, which freed him to be aggressive.
Right.
It was great, and then he noticed at a certain point that the more aggressive he was, the more he raised from people who were paying attention to politics but weren't billionaires. So he liked that method of fundraising, and I liked it because it was building power. But so over the course of the next, this was in January of 2009, over the course of the next, I guess 6 months to a year, he would, every time you go to the floor, right, the floor is where votes happen, and there are votes 4 times a day on everything from important bills to renaming post offices. He would go to the floor and he would ask other members of Congress to sign up to co-sponsor Ron Paul's bill to audit the Fed, right? And just work, to go and explain it and explain the issue. So
here's, I think...
well, and meanwhile, what I was doing and what what he was doing was following up with a constant stream of letters, requests for information. At hearings, we would ask more questions. There was one hearing with the Inspector General of the Fed, Elizabeth Coleman, where Bloomberg was uncovering more about what was going on. And so over the course of that time, more and more started coming to light that the Federal Reserve was doing some things that were, really, whether they were criminal or not, it was something that the public needed to understand and Congress needed to understand.
So we get to a critical question here, because I often look at it and think these congressmen know what they're doing, and they're not going to audit the Fed, or they're not going to do X or Y that would be against their financial interest, or more importantly, the financial interests of their donors, which give them the money to get reelected. But there's some chance, partly based on what you're telling me, that they're just not that savvy, that it's kind of more of a subconscious protect your donors thing rather than a conscious one. Because when you're telling me Alan Grayson goes and talks to these guys, I'm surprised they're even having a conversation.
Oh yeah, they talk all the time. It's like they're like coworkers.
And so what I mean by that is, did they have an open mind? Like, oh, Alan, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. All right, maybe I'll sign on.
Some of them did, some of them didn't. And Ron Paul got all the Republicans on board, and they just signed up because.
So Grayson's only talking to the Democrats.
Yeah.
So what happens when he talks to, and we won't name names, but
I don't mind naming names.
Oh, okay.
Jim Himes.
Okay.
Jim Himes, whose chief of staff was a former UBS lobbyist. Jim Himes, who worked at Goldman Sachs. Jim Himes, who has a lot of donors from Goldman Sachs. Jim Himes, who's probably going to make a lot of money after he's out of office. I think that's just, there's no question to me that he shouldn't be in office. And he didn't sign on because, and he is 100% supportive of the banks. He represents a very strong Democratic district in Connecticut. But there are a lot of people like that. Jim Himes was probably one of the worst. Another one was, what's his name? From Colorado. He actually owns a bank.
Well, that might be a little bit.
But that's the thing. But most of them do have they have something of an open mind on a lot of these issues, and you can talk to them about. Because
I find that really encouraging, actually, because I like my sense of it, from covering it from the outside, is that they don't have that much of an open mind. That victories are incredibly rare to come by, because you'll run into a money block. You'll run into a situation where they go, it's going to upset my donors. No, I'm not going to do it. And I'm surprised also that Ron Paul was able to get Republicans on. People like Jim DeMint eventually on the Senate side. Jim DeMint, do you think Jim DeMint is a guy who actually believes his own crap and thinks he has an ideology? Or internally is he thinking, look, dude, I get paid by the banks, I'm going to serve the banks, and I've got this libertarian BS or whatever to cover up for?
White supremacy is an ideology. All right? There's a consistency there. And it is a frightening thing, but it's something that we need to sort of recognize. And for a variety of reasons, white supremacists like Jim DeMint, and I say white supremacists not in the neo-Nazi sense, not in the white nationalist sense or KKK sense, but in the sense that the Republican Party represents the interests of white Christian men and is fairly explicit about that, and wants to continue the dominance of white Christian men, and that's what their ideology is. They have an ideology, and part of that ideology is being afraid of institutions like the Federal Reserve, which are centralized, powerful institutions that can finance social programs. Doesn't want them around. That's the same reason why Paul Krugman likes the Federal Reserve, because he wants to fund large-scale social programs.
How about banks, though? I feel like the Republicans are a wholly owned subsidiary of the banks. So there are different
banks, right?
Okay.
You're right, but there are different banks. There are regional banks, community banks, and there are mega banks. And there's also hedge fund guys on the buy side, and then there are the big banks on the sell side. So the Wall Street, and then there are insurance companies. There's all sorts of different institutions within Wall Street, within the financial services industry, and sometimes they fight with each other, and sometimes they agree, and they have a kind of class allegiance, but they do fight with each other. And some of them have more of an informational advantage with regards to the Federal Reserve, and some of them don't. Like, there's been a big fight between credit unions and community banks forever about a whole variety of different things. And they're not like, neither of them are particularly nice groups. They both want to gouge consumers, but they do fight about capital markets issues.
So you might be able to pull some of the senators and congressmen on your side, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, depending on if they're on the buy side or the sell side, who their big donors are on those sides.
And depending on what they believe. But this is, I want to make this point because, you know, you hit on something important, which is that, you know, Alan always told me the air is thin up there, right? Which is to say, like, the reason politicians like to make you think that there are all of these mystical processes and that the system is so hard to impact is because they want to explain to you why they can't do anything. Right? There's plenty that they can do. Like, you notice there's been no oversight. Like, Barney Frank didn't issue one subpoena when he ran the Financial Services Committee. He could have issued many subpoenas. He couldn't pass legislation necessarily, but he could have issued a lot of subpoenas. And the you know, Senate Dems could have done that too. And there's basically no investigation or oversight going on. And this is an issue of political corruption. And this is why I blame Obama, because Obama, you know, I was in Congress and I saw these guys have a lot of power. Now, they don't have, you know, and I had power as a staffer. I mean, for some reason, people listened to me and cared about what I thought. And so I could use that to get information from them to expose wrongdoing. And that had an impact. It could help save people's homes. It could help craft better policy, and it did. And I am outraged that people say about the President of the United States, well, what can he do? He's only the President. It's a lie. It's a giant lie. And I look at him, and I look at the people who are in office, and I think that Barack Obama is a con artist, that Barack Obama is a liar, and he is on the side of Wall Street, and he is, in my opinion, if you are believe in a fair distribution of wealth and power, Barack Obama is your enemy. And I think that he is no different than Mitt Romney. And this comes from experience. It comes from seeing that there is a lot of power that individuals have and can wield within our system. And if Barack Obama had wanted to, he could have reorganized the economy and restructured our world into a more sustainable model. So
why do you think he didn't do it? Is it just
I think because he's corrupt. I think he's a corrupt actor. I think he's selfish, and I think he's a narcissist. But I mean, the point is, it doesn't really matter. You can look at the record, and you can see the pattern of lies. The fact that that inequality is actually getting worse faster under Obama than Bush, right? And
now, so Matt, here's what I'm concerned about. The structure in the system, right? Incentives and disincentives. So I believe a system that is predicated based on campaign donors will do the bidding of campaign donors. That it's not. So to me, Obama as a person is irrelevant.
He's not irrelevant, and he had a lot of campaign donors, and he could have used them. He had this ability to get. So there are many different types of campaign donors. He had whatever 3 million, 10 million. I don't remember how many he had in 2008, but he didn't cultivate and sustain those because he didn't want them. That was a choice because he wanted to get his power from a more centralized group of insiders. But I want to get back to the policy, to the process, because I think I don't want to get into rants.
No, I know. So that's why I wanted to come back to that, because to me, I think the system is going to produce a race where we have Obama versus Romney, because that's what the system is built to do. That's the incentive structure that it is set up.
Right.
You put in campaign donations to both of these candidates, and you get the candidates you want.
But we are part of this system. We don't have to vote. We don't have to be a part of it.
No, but so given that, my fundamental question in the conversation we're having is, how do you have these Republicans who then turn around on that same Dodd-Frank bill and oppose it every inch of the way, clearly working for the big banks, the J.P. Morgans, et cetera, and trying to destroy any kind of reform?
They didn't really oppose it every step of the way.
Okay, well, tell me about that. But I was going to say, but at the same time, they vote for auditing the Fed, which the banks desperately didn't want to do. So that's the part I'm not getting. That's why I wanted to have that conversation with you.
So some of the Republicans in the House and the Senate are different, right? There were certain Republicans in the Senate who were very much opposed to auditing the Fed. Almost every Republican in the House was for auditing the Fed. And also, I mean, it takes away, anything that takes away power from a regulatory agency is something that the Republicans often, well, not anything. I mean, sometimes they protect certain regulators, like they protect the OCC, which is the most bank-friendly regulator. But in the case of the Federal Reserve, you know, ideologically they are opposed to this kind of centralized banking. They want to return basically to the gold standard and to there's a sort of weird mishmash of reasons for that. But I'm sorry, where do you want me to go with this?
I've seen in different situations where, for example, Republicans will sometimes make the mistake of getting their talking point wrong. And they'll say something that is either anti-bank or anti-oil.
Right.
I've seen this happen time and time again. And then they have a listserv. And the listserv doesn't just have congressmen, it also has lobbyists connected to all these industries that fund them. And they'll get an email the next day saying, hey, get back in line. You know what you're doing?
You don't think the Democrats have this?
No. I'm sure the Democrats have it.
Okay.
So my point is, given that system, how did they let auditing the Fed slip by? That's the exception to the rule that I just can't wrap my mind around.
Well, because there were no organized interests that were really opposing it. Like the Fed.
Really? Why wouldn't J.P. Morgan and Citigroup and Bank of America
they had their
oppose
hands full.
Uh-huh.
So they had their hands full with Dodd-Frank and all the different places they were trying to fight it. They were trying to fight the Consumer Protection Bureau. They were trying to fight the Volcker Rule. They were trying to fight.
Name it. There was dozens of rules. That's right.
The Resolution Authority.
So they thought this was the least important one, or?
Yeah, this is the one that they. There were no preset. Like Washington is a place where there are just deep institutional habits, and there were a couple of reasons why this fight was successful. And one is that a bill was going to move. Right? We knew the healthcare was going to move, and we knew that financial reform was going to move. And a bunch of financial reform bills, the bailout, the Fannie and Freddie bill, they had already moved, and there were more that were coming. Right? So there was a lot of interest in this area. So if there's no interest in an area, or if there's no, like somebody analogized Congress to surfing, right? You just got to catch waves and attach amendments and things to stuff has to pass, like defense appropriations. In this case, we knew that financial reform was going to move, so we knew we could stick amendments onto it, and the bill would basically get passed. The other thing is that because there was so much in this bill, things could slip by that the industry didn't have time to mobilize around. Like they understood how to mobilize, say, around smart swipe fees. They understood how to mobilize around the Volcker Rule and derivatives because, if you're JP Morgan, you make a lot of money from derivatives, you understand you have to defend it, right? But auditing the Fed is more abstract, right? They had never gotten these kinds of loans from the Federal Reserve before. There was no clear sense of, like, they didn't have a profit and loss statement from their Fed liquidity lines. So there was no institutional, institutional defenders of this, except for the Fed itself. And the Fed went all out, and the economics profession went all out to block this. And they watered it down a little bit, but they ultimately failed. And it's an interesting story how we were able to get it through committee, which I can tell you, but it looks like you have a question.
No, it's just to summarize, it seems like you caught a window in time where the banks were busy fighting other things. This was a nebulous issue, so it wasn't their most pressing concern. The Republicans thought, hey, wait, I'm against regulation. Hey, wait, I'm a libertarian. I'm not sure about the Federal Reserve. So you caught them at just the right issue where that you can get them on your side. You had two powerful actors who were really motivated in Alan Grayson and Ron Paul. So and
we worked with the blogosphere. Right? And there were no lefty groups that had been working on this for many years. And lefty groups, like liberal groups that are funded by foundations and groups like Move On, are basically designed to lose. And so if they're not working on something, there might be an opportunity to win. I'm not.
So no, but tell me why you say that in this regard, as an example.
Well, I mean, they didn't. Look. Everybody knows that the housing market is completely decimated, right? And it's full of fraud, and that the Obama administration is responsible for it and has, done nothing to send Wall Street actors to jail. But you will see that every liberal institution, from the AFL to Move On to Campaign for a Fair Settlement or whatever, they're all afraid to say anything, do anything, and they're attacking Mitt Romney on it because they're basically fundraising vehicles, and liberals don't want to hear about anything wrong with their leader, even if their leader is doing terrible things. So these institutions, they're fundraising, and they also don't know anything about policy and don't really care. So for instance, this healthcare bill was, by and large, is not sustainable, and the system is going to fall apart. It was a bad idea. And I think if anybody who looks at it seriously understands that it doesn't impose any cost controls, it shouldn't have been done this way. But the entire liberal space lined up behind it because it was a fundraising thing. If you say we support Obamacare on either side, you can raise a lot of money.
Well, wouldn't you raise just as much money if you win, perhaps even more than if you lose? So because you said they were structured to lose.
Well, they did lose, right? You're not going to see anybody, you're not going to see a lot of people helped by this, by Dodd-Frank. You're not going to see a lot of people helped by this healthcare bill.
And perhaps one of the things, the incentive structure there is that if you lose, you have a reason to keep going. Whereas if you win and you get your objective, well, then I guess you should disband.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, there's and you see this all over the place. You know, the Middle East peace process industry. There's a lot of the nonprofit industrial complex. It's designed to. There's a really good phrase, but basically, like any institution will ultimately continue to perpetuate the problem that it is designed to solve, right? Because institutions want to continue existing, But just to get back to Dodd-Frank for a second and how we actually moved this bill through. I mean, basically what we did is we worked with bloggers, with ex-regulators, with like people in the industry who were gathering in these online communities and chewing up these documents that we were requesting. One deal that the New York Fed did with Citigroup, that was, they took $250 billion, $240 billion of liabilities. Essentially, they said to Citigroup, we will guarantee $240 billion of your liabilities. You don't even have to give us a list in return for nothing. And the FDIC got a little bit, but New York Fed itself got nothing. And the Citigroup got to keep the cash flow from those assets. These were toxic assets. And eventually, the Citigroup decided it didn't want the deal anymore because it didn't want to pay the FDIC anything. And because the market understood that they didn't need the insurance that the New York Fed provided, because the government would never let Citigroup go under anyway. So Citigroup didn't need the insurance at a certain point once the market understood that it was too big to fail. And so we went through these different deals and we just showed repeatedly that this was going on. And there was some flexibility in the crafting of Dodd-Frank, even though the broad contours had been laid down by Wall Street in 2008 and the Obama administration in 2009. The broad contours were laid down. Within that, there was a lot of flexibility. And so what we did is, in every hearing that was possible, Congressman Grayson would ask questions, would make the case repeatedly every day, going to the floor, getting people to sign on. And eventually we got something like over 300 co-sponsors of this bill in the House side. It doesn't mean you get to bring it to a vote. You need to sign a discharge petition to get it to the vote without leadership saying okay. But Barney Frank, eventually with 300 co-sponsors, Grayson went to him and said, look, we have 300 co-sponsors. We should be able to have this as an amendment to Dodd-Frank in the committee. And what they did is they went to the committee parliamentarian who had to judge whether this amendment would be germane to the bill, which is to say, if Dodd-Frank is handling everything except the Federal Reserve, then the amendment isn't germane. That's not an issue in the Senate, it is in the House. The parliamentarian ruled that it was germane, which was a big deal. So then we had this is when it got interesting. Then we had a fight in committee when what's called a markup, it's a type of hearing in which the committee actually votes on legislation. A lot of legislation gets amended, and this is an important part of the legislative process, was the markup. So most of the members were on board, or a lot of the members of the committee were on board H.R. 1207, which was Ron Paul's bill. So this is what the Fed did. They got Mel Watt, who is the chairman of the subcommittee on monetary policy, I think domestic monetary policy, to introduce I think the Federal Reserve Sunshine Amendment, which was different than the Paul Grayson Amendment. And this one was sort of a long, complex amendment that was, 8 to 12 pages. It said, you can audit this, you can audit the pencil sharpeners, you can audit our internal operations, you can audit all this stuff. And then it had these weird self-referential language it was difficult to interpret. As a lot of the legislative process is really screwed up because a lot of amendments say in line 13 remove and replace with or, remove may and replace with shall. And it's like imagine if you had to do track changes on Microsoft but in paper format. That's what actually this stuff is. It's a solvable software problem, but they haven't solved it because if they don't solve it, lobbyists have more power. So this weird convoluted amendment, and most of the members were like, well, you know, Grayson and Ron Paul, they seem to have a good idea, but they're kind of out there. I don't want to do nothing. I don't want to not audit the Fed. But I don't want the Grayson-Paul thing because they're just extreme. This one looks just right, okay? So what we did is Grayson, and this is why he's a fantastic congressman because he's an awesome lawyer. We got all of the law books and compared everything and made sure that we understood exactly what it meant. And actually, the Federal Reserve Sunshine Amendment made the process more opaque. It actually subjected the Fed to less audits than would have happened before. The Fed did this in 1978 as well, the last time that they were under this kind of attack, legislative attack. So we went to the press. Oh, and the Fed has a lot of relationships with newspaper outlets, so they floated this compromise through the press, like Bloomberg and a bunch of other outlets said, well, the Fed has introduced, not Fed, Mel Watt introduced this, you know, amendments. It's not as extreme, but it still does some auditing, right? Which it actually did the reverse. So we went to Ryan Grimm at the Huffington Post and sat down with him and explained what was going on, and he wrote a piece. And this was within like 12 hours, right? So the time, it's just the speed is really important. And he writes a piece. No lawyer's going to give him a quote, but he was confident enough in his own judgment and in the analysis that we gave him that he was willing to write that piece, and did write it, saying that this amendment is going to make it more difficult to audit it. Based on that article, which Grayson handed out in committee and on the floor, we got a letter from a bunch of different groups that said, don't vote for the Mel Watts amendment. That is actually a vote for more bailouts, more secrecy. Vote for the Paul Grayson amendment. So the Fed kind of overreached, and rather than doing a real compromise, what they did is they got greedy and tried to put more restrictions, and we busted them on it. And the speed of the Huffington Post was able to neutralize their press strategy.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
But then the groups seem to have helped you, the progressive groups there.
That's true. Actually, in this case, they did. Dean Baker was important, Firedog Lake, who are not. I mean, these are smaller groups that actually have some track record of success. Yeah. And so the last thing, and this was really interesting, so because this whole time, the Fed is putting out their side of the story, which is like economists saying, you know, hey, I'm an economist, you can trust me, the Federal Reserve needs to stay independent above politics. And then you know, I kept leaking stories from various people that I had found. Like, for instance, this guy wrote a book in the 90s about the Fed. And one of the things he found is that the Fed funds most of the economics profession. Most economists have one or multiple contracts with the Fed, macroeconomists. And so we did an update of this. So we found that the Fed still funds most economists. And so every time they'd put out a letter saying, you know, these 8 economists support Dodd-Frank or sorry, whatever the Fed wanted instead of Ron Paul's bill, we were able to bust them and say, they're funded by the Fed. They all have contracts with different reserve banks. And
so that,
and then the day of the vote, there was a letter from Paul Volcker and Alan Greenspan talking about how it's really bad that the Federal Reserve would be subject to congressional pressure, right? And they had put this on every chair of every member, which is a huge, like, you're not supposed to do that, right? You're not allowed to put marketing materials on the chairs of members. And so Grayson went to the staffer in charge of the committee seating, was like, you have to have all of those removed. That's against committee rules. And so it's like all the little nitty-gritty pieces, right? Like, Grayson's a knife fighter, right? He's like wanted to get in there and win, and we would like work hard and do anything we wanted, or not anything we could to actually achieve the policy goals that we thought we needed to achieve.
So, Matt, that's really interesting.
We just wanted it more than they did.
Well, but that's what I was going to get to. So, you know, there's many critical elements to that story. The right story coming out on Huffington Post at the right time. And honestly, I'm surprised at what a large impact that it had, which is great. The progressive groups...
Because we handed out the story, right? I mean, it's not just about the press, it's also about making sure that this stuff is seen. Because most of these members had 30 seconds to make up their mind and hadn't thought about it.
See, that's the other amazing thing, because I was talking to Congressman Steve Cohen from Tennessee the other day on the television show, and we were talking about the fortune story on the Fast and the Furious, and how it debunked the whole nonsense about Fast and Furious, and there was no such program, etc. And he said, oh, most people in Congress haven't seen that at all. So they're voting to hold Eric Holder in contempt, which they probably should for other reasons. Okay, but on this thing, when they have no idea that the story is totally bunk. So, but that leads me all to my overall point, and that I'm getting out of this conversation. So all these things had to go right, but without somebody pushing, like Alan Grayson, at every step of the way, handing in those out, taking those down, interpreting the really hard work of interpreting the amendment that, or the version that Mel Watt wanted to do, doing the legal work, etc. They would have overwhelmed you, right? Well, and you would have. So without Alan Grayson, I'm getting the sense from your story, there's no way to audit the Fed would have passed.
There's no way, and you know, and not to say, well, there's another angle which I shouldn't leave out. This is really important. Ron Paul's people were just calling. They were calling all the time, and like sometimes, like Fire Dog Lake got some liberals to call in, but almost entirely this was libertarians calling in, putting grassroots pressure to the point where other staffers, they just, first of all, they didn't like me. A lot of staff. I mean, I was a very polarizing staffer, but like
I'm not surprised by that.
The liberals like me, but I'll tell you about the time I yelled at Wells Fargo lobbyists, but it's eventually. But the only time I yelled at anyone in Congress was at a Wells Fargo lobbyist.
Well, that sounds like a good time to do it.
I don't regret it. I don't regret it. But you know, they were annoyed because they would be getting all these calls, and the staffers were far more reactionary than the members. The members were relatively open-minded. It was the staffers who were actually a big part of the problem, because they were looking out for their next job with another member or with a trade association or whatnot. So
that's really interesting too.
But Ron Paul's people had been educated and understood the importance of the Audit the Fed problem, and by and large, progressives didn't understand Wall Street, weren't actually opposed to the bailouts. I mean, this is the dirty secret of politics, which everybody tends to lie about. Progressives are against Wall Street. It isn't true. And most of their validators are paid off by Wall Street. So, you know,
so I gotta ask,
so it was Ron Paul's grassroots base that pushed this really aggressively.
So how much do those calls matter? Like from the outside, it looks like they don't matter at all. Like you make calls, you send in the emails, you send in the faxes, and it seems like you're sending to a brick wall. But are you saying from the internal point of view that it actually does matter, that it influences them?
It's context dependent, but in this case, the reason we were able to win is because there was a spotlight on the problem, right? So they knew, every member understood that voting for Paul Grayson, the Paul Grayson bill was the safer choice. Right, which was important. We made it the safer choice. We highlighted it in the financial blogs. We got a lot of reporting done around corruption and institutional corruption in the economics profession. We had all these people calling in, and they knew that anywhere they went, they would find, you know, somebody pushing this. Their colleagues, maybe a group, or or calls, right? And so it was, if you just call up and you say, this is what I want, you know, you might catch the congressman and he might say, that's a good idea, right? So I can't say that calls don't matter, but calling is very much context dependent. And most members and most kind of people who are working in politics are not telling you the truth about what works and what doesn't. So it's really hard to tell.
Out of all those, I mean, and it's a really simple question, simplistic question, but emails, calls, etc., what's the most effective?
I mean, I think an in-person office visit to your congressman is the most effective, right? Sit down with the staffer who handles that issue and make your case.
So 50 people from that district show up.
One person from that district. You don't need 50, you just need one.
But won't they think like, oh, it's some kook from the district, it's one guy, it doesn't matter?
Yeah, but you're still, you get, lobbyists are there all the time. Nobody else is, right? And one individual lobbyist doesn't necessarily matter, but day after day after day after day, lobbyists coming in, it does matter, right?
So Washington office, local office, does it matter? Was one better than the other?
Well, it would be better if you can go to the Washington office to meet with the policy people sometimes, but you can do that when there's a district break. You can go to the district office and see if you can meet the policy staff or find out when they're going to be in district. Or you can call them and say, hey, I'm looking for the staffer who handles defense, women's rights, banking, whatever, and they'll just connect you. Because they're used to people calling up. I mean, at the beginning of every Congress, you have somebody calls up 80 times a day saying, I'm looking for a list of your staffers, and you give it to them. And what these are services or lobbying firms, services that sell lists of staffers to lobbying firms, or lobbying firms themselves making their own lists. So you can just call up and say, I want to talk to the staffer who handles X, or who's the staffer who handles X. And there's a naming convention for mail.house.gov. And you can strike up a conversation with them. I mean, I was pretty open-minded staffer for non-lobbyists because I was interested in what was going on. There are others there too.
So look, obviously I can talk to you about this all day. So let me ask one final question. Of the staffers that are there, and again, a ridiculously specific question, I know of course you don't have a number, but a general sense of what percentage of them mean to do well, and what percentage of them are worried about, hey, where's my next job going to be? Is it going to be with the banking industry, the defense industry, et cetera? So yeah, with your calls and all that stuff, I got to do what I got to do to feed my family.
I can't answer that question with a number because it's a large corporate culture. I mean, think about it like that. Like it's not a special thing in weird Greek and Roman inspired buildings. It's just a lot of people, most of whom are bureaucrats at heart, right? They're not trying to do good or bad. They're just trying to gossip at the water cooler. With that in mind, you'll meet some great ones who really mean well. You'll meet some ones who don't care. You'll meet some ones who mean well and are incompetent, or who you'll meet some who are competent some days and not competent other days. It entirely depends. I think you're probably going to find that the Republican staffers are more they're more just businesslike, and they're gonna they're not going to really care what you think unless you're a lobbyist. With the Democratic staffers, they may care what you think if you're not a lobbyist, or they may just lie to you and tell you they care. And I've always sort of wondered whether it makes a difference. So a friend of mine told me recently that with the Republican staffers this time, it's so bad that she will email them with a question about a bill that they've proposed, like, what does this bill do? And a couple days later, they'll get a call from a lobbyist saying, oh, I heard you had a question about this bill. Right? Like they won't even bother.
I think that's a great example.
Is that worse than saying, than the staffer themselves getting the answer from the lobbyist, cutting and pasting it, and emailing it back? I don't know. It's just like an aesthetic difference.
Right, right. It's funny. There was the story today of Tim Geithner with the LIBOR mess, who just copied and pasted from what the U.S. banks wanted in regards to fixing LIBOR.
No, it's right. So, I knew about the LIBOR thing in 2009 because it was an open. And if I knew about it, and I was not connected really, if I knew about it, other people knew about it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I knew people who knew about it too. It's ridiculous. All right, Matt, I have a whole other line of question. We'll have to do that on another day. You've been a great guest. Thanks so much. So everybody, check out two things now. Brand X with Russell Brand on FX. That's Thursdays at 11 p.m. Matt is there, political analyst. As you can tell, he knows a lot about it. And tell people where you write these days. I write at Naked Capitalism and occasionally for the Politico and a couple other places. If you want to see people challenging mainstream thought, the blogs that Matt writes on Naked Capitalism are definitely fitting the bill. So thank you, Matt. We appreciate it. Hey, thanks a lot. All right.